Hi guys, today I'm here with my March reading wrap up. In February, I didn't read a single book, which I think is the first time ever since I started my blog and my YouTube channel. So it was pretty scary, and going into March, I was a bit nervous about what I was going to read and if I was going to read anything. I think it really knocked my confidence not reading anything because reading is so tied up in my identity, and so then not reading anything shook me a lot. So in March, my goal was to read the books that made me happiest, to read the books that I knew I was going to love, and that is exactly what I did. I've got lots of books to show you. I've got 6 in total that I want to tell you how much I love. All of these I thought were amazing, and they're not all classics, but I think lots of these are suited to readers who aren't typically into YA or who are looking for something a little bit different. So I hope you enjoy me talking about the books just as much as I enjoyed reading them. Like I said, it was really scary having not read anything in February, and so going into March, I just didn't know what my first book of the month was going to be. I didn't know what I was going to read that was going to kickstart my love of reading again, but I chose the right book because the first book I read in March was A Sky Painted Gold by Laura Wood, which is now my favourite book that I have read so far this year. I can't see this going from the top spot, to be honest. I'd have to read something seriously amazing for the rest of the year to knock this off the top 3 at least, because this book is amazing. It came out last year and it is set in Cornwall in the 1920s and is about a girl called Lou who meets the enigmatic Cardew siblings. It's a Great Gatsby-esque story with hints of Eva Ibbotson. It's got romance and talks about class, and it has these decadent parties which I loved so much. The characters are amazing. I fell in love with Lou in it, and Laura Wood is now one of my all-time favourite UK YA authors. I think one of the best things about this book is the narrative voice, the way that Laura Wood writes the main character Lou. For example, the prose is so gorgeous. She says, "By then the Cardew house in all its sprawling, faded beauty had not seen a single friendly face, or an unfriendly one for that matter, in over 5 years. The walled orchard, like the house, had been abandoned, growing tangled and wild until I crept in and started helping myself. After that first taste, I didn't even try to stay away. I came back the next day and the next, always exploring a tiny bit further, pushing deeper into the secret island, making each part of it my own." And as soon as I read that prologue, I fell in love. It's so rare that I read a book and I fall in love on the first page. Even though it does happen sometimes, I feel like I felt instantly in love with this book, and there was something about it that made me want to keep reading on and on and on. It was a feeling I hadn't felt for such a long time, and so it made it even more special when I found this book, and I felt like I had discovered it just as the protagonist Lou discovers the Cardew house. Historical fiction is becoming somewhat of a rarity in YA, and so I think it's really great when you can find a really amazing historical fiction book. And Laura Wood actually has another book coming out in the summer, which I am so excited about. It is a Much Ado About Nothing YA retelling set in Italy in the 1930s, and it sounds like my dream book. And honestly, I think about it at least twice a day and how excited I am about it. I can't stop thinking about how much I want to read it, and I just want to reread this book. I feel like it's the perfect book to read this summer. You will get lost in the way that she describes Cornwall, so if you love Daphne du Maurier, you might enjoy this book, or if you like The Great Gatsby or Eva Ibbotson. I feel like this is the perfect combination of The Great Gatsby, Eva Ibbotson and Daphne du Maurier, and so if you like any of those things, then you will love this book. And it is a YA book with characters of YA age, but you don't need to be a young adult yourself to read it. It is a book that I think everybody will fall in love with. The second book I read in March was another YA book. This was one that I'd seen floating around a lot, and I'd had a copy for a while, and I thought it was going to be something that I really enjoyed, and I really did. And it was The Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo. This is another recent release, and it is a book told in verse. I'm really enjoying verse novels. I think that you can do great things with the narrative and play around with the style and play around with story, and I think that's something I'm loving seeing in YA at the moment. It's something I'd like to see expand to a lot of other forms of literature, so I'd love to see other genres taking on verse novels, because I think it is such an innovative way of writing, and I think it's really bringing back a resurgence in poetry, which I think is great to see. I love reading poetry, but not everybody loves reading poetry. But there is something about a novel in verse that makes that poetry come alive and sing. The Poet X is told from the perspective of a girl living in New York called Xiomara. She loves writing and she has a notebook full of her own writing, but it's not something that is generally accepted, and she's struggling with her identity and family issues. And it really is a book about fighting for who you want to become and the barriers holding you back from becoming the person you want to be. It is incredibly powerful and such a quick read, but at the same time it's something that you will think about long after you finish reading it, and it's one that I think you can go back to time and time again and get something new out of it every time. I'm really looking forward to seeing what she produces next. She's got another book coming out this year and I think it's going to be amazing. This has already won lots of awards and been nominated for lots more. It's beginning to be nominated for a lot of awards in the UK, which I'm loving to see. It's just incredible, and I want to read it again actually just because I'd love to experience the emotions of it all over again. Moving away from YA now, and then I read a book in translation. This is Bird Cottage by Ava Meyer, which is translated from Dutch. It's been published by Pushkin Press and it's been translated into English by Antoinette Fawcett. This is basically my perfect book. I fell in love with it from the first page. I feel like I said a few minutes ago that it's very rare I fall in love from the first page. It takes a lot to make me feel like, yes, this is my perfect book. But this and A Sky Painted Gold both were. So I got two books in the same month that I just fell in love with completely. This was just amazing. It is a fictional account of the life of a real woman called Len Howard, who did lots of scientific experiments on birds. But instead of being in a laboratory environment where birds don't really act in the same way as they do in the wild, she moved to this village in Sussex and she let the birds into her house and she lived literally with the birds. They would nest in her house and they would come in and land on her shoulders, and as she was writing at her desk they would land on her hands. And there is one account of somebody in real life saying that they could see her walking through the fields one day and she was covered head to toe in birds, in particular great tits. And I love birds. I don't know if you know this about me, but other than books, one of my greatest passions in life is birds. There is nothing I love more than sitting outside and watching as the birds fly around me. I love going outside into nature. That's something that's so important to me that I do. It's something that helps my mental health. It makes me feel better, and it's just one of the greatest things I love in life. So throwing that all into a book, you just get something that is my number one ideal. I loved the structure in this and how you can't really tell whether it is a fictional account or if it is real life. It blurs the line between biography and fiction. And the structure follows Ava's fictional version of Len's life through different points in her life. So it follows her as she was a child and how she found her love of birds. It follows her when she's much older. It follows her as Ava pieces together writings of Len's to look at the studies that she made of the birds, in particular one bird called Star. So they were incredibly important observations and did so much for science, and yet Len wasn't really appreciated in the field, one because she was a woman, and two because she didn't have any scientific or academic background in this. It was just something that she loved, and so people didn't respect her. And when Len died, she bequeathed her property and her surroundings to be made into some kind of nature reserve where the birds could continue to live, and yet her wishes were not respected after her death, which I think really sums up how she was treated in her life. She was treated as somebody who was seen as slightly eccentric, and yet she was incredibly fascinating, and I think that stories like this about fascinating women deserve to be told. In this age of climate change and global warming and a climate crisis, we need books like this that shine a light on nature and how amazing it is. Surprise, surprise, the next book I read was also one that I love. I kind of wish that I could throw a book in here that I didn't love as much, because I feel like you'll get bored by me just saying that I loved all of these books, but I honestly did. I found my passion for reading again, and this next book was one that I think everybody is going to love. I think it's going to take the world by storm this year, and it is The Flatshare by Beth O'Leary. This has one of the best and most original concepts I have heard for a long time. It is a contemporary adult novel novel about a man called Leon and a woman called Tiffy who share the same flat. But they don't just share the same flat, they share the same bed, because Leon works night shifts, Tiffy works in the day, so at night she has the bed, in the day he has the bed, and they communicate through post-it notes and letters and details around the flat that they share. They don't meet until later on in the book, but you feel like they really intimately know each other because they kind of do. They share the same bed, they share the same surroundings, they're piecing together each other's lives through their objects. And I also loved the personal look at their lives. So Tiffy has been escaping this abusive relationship that she's been in, but she can't quite acknowledge that it was abusive, even though the people around her know that it was. Leon has a brother who is in prison and he needs Tiffy to live there and to rent it and pay her share of the rent because he needs to pay his brother's legal fees. He knows that his brother is innocent and he is trying to prove that he is innocent, and so he needs to cover those legal costs. Leon also works in a hospice, and so you get to know the patients. Tiffy is this quite eccentric character. She dresses quite unusually and she is just larger than life. They are very different characters and have very different writing styles, which I think is incredibly difficult to write, but Beth O'Leary does it so well. There was so much heart and humour and warmth in this book, and I do think everybody's going to fall in love with it. I know that I did, and I feel like it has been hyped a lot, but for good reason. I'm so glad that this book has been published. I can't wait to see what Beth O'Leary does next. I follow her on Instagram and I'm really intrigued by when she posts about writing her second book because I can't wait to read it. I feel like it is such an original concept that I think people are going to fall in love with. I haven't read a book quite like this, and I think it does something quite different and puts a different spin on the adult contemporary genre. So it is amazing. I hope that everybody reads this, and I got this for review from NetGalley, but I also purchased my own copy of the book. I pre-ordered it because I was so excited and really wanted to own a physical copy. Please read this book, it is amazing. After reading A Sky Painted Gold, I wanted to find something that had the same feel to it, and I'd never read an Eva Ibbotson book before, but I knew it was something that I wanted to do. I didn't really know where to start, but I decided to start with Magic Flutes, and I was just blown away. I'm sorry to say, or not so sorry to say, this is another book that I absolutely adored with all my heart. I fell in love with Eva Ibbotson through it. She's again now one of my favourite authors, and I can't believe I found so many new favourite authors in March. I went from reading nothing to reading all these amazing books, and I just loved this. I thought it was just the best. It's romantic and sweet, and I feel like it fits a very specific mould, but if you're looking for that kind of mould of a plot that you kind of know that it's going to have a happy ending but that doesn't matter, then you need this in your life. It's a kind of uplifting fiction, but at the same time there are more serious things going on about it. This one is about a princess called Tessa and an English businessman called Guy. Guy was orphaned and he was raised by a woman in Newcastle called Martha. He has really raised himself from the ranks and turned himself into this millionaire with lots of prospects and lots of contacts. Tessa has grown up in this very ramshackle castle that is for sale. They can't really afford to live there anymore, but Tessa works in a theatre in Vienna and she is undercover. Nobody knows that she's a princess. She just wants to work. But their lives collide when Guy buys Tessa's castle and stages a performance run by the company Tessa works for. You kind of know that they're going to end up together, and you go through the book knowing that there's going to be a happy ending. There's going to be that light at the end of the tunnel, and that's what I loved about this. Sometimes you want a book that you can escape into, and this was the perfect escapism. I've since read some more Eva Ibbotson. I'll be talking about those in my April reading wrap up, but I love her so much. I love how she's very reliable and you just know what you're going to get when you read one of her books. She's amazing and such a stalwart of British children's literature, so she's incredible. I'm so pleased that I read this and so pleased that I discovered it for the first time. I'm so glad that I took the chance on Eva Ibbotson's books. I did not regret it. And then the final book that I read in March was one of my most anticipated YA releases of 2019. It is A Good Girl's Guide to Murder by Holly Jackson, an author I have got to know because we are both debuting this year. I love Holly. She is very funny, very brilliant, just one of the best people I've met so far on my debut journey, and I loved this book so much. I'm not a huge fan of YA thrillers. I'm very particular. I've read a few before and been quite disappointed by them because I want something that's gonna pack a punch, and this book definitely did. It is about a girl called Pip who is exploring a murder that happened in 2012. She is exploring it for a project she's doing for school. In the UK we have something called the EPQ, which is an extended independent project that you can choose to do when you're doing your A-levels. Pip is a very focused character. I feel like we would be very good friends, and I like reading about characters you know that you would get on well with. I feel like we've got a lot in common, and I feel like I would just think that she was amazing. I liked this look at exploring a murder that wasn't happening immediately in that moment. She is re-exploring the facts. She knows that something happened, and it's about a boy called Sal who was convicted of her murder, but before he could be convicted he committed suicide. And so she's bringing up old cases, and in bringing up these old memories, Pip is exploring the darker side of the small town she lives in, where people aren't happy that she's digging up the past. If you love YA books like Karen M. McManus's books, you're gonna love this even more. I promise you, Holly Jackson is the best thriller writer on the scene right now. She is doing something very different in weaving social media into the story, which is probably my favourite aspect of it. It comes out in the beginning of May, and I think everybody should read it. You're not going to regret it. I read it in a day. I could not put it down. I didn't intend to read it. I read the first page and then I read the whole book. It was that good. I had to find out what happened. You can't go wrong with any of these books, but if you're looking for a good thriller, something you're not going to be able to put down, you need to read A Good Girl's Guide to Murder. So that was my March reading wrap up. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found a few recommendations. I'd love to know in the comments what you read in March, and I hope you weren't too bored by me constantly saying, I loved this book. I just honestly loved all of these books, and I think you'll find the same pattern happening again in April, because reading A Sky Painted Gold somehow sparked something in my brain that made me love reading again. And I read so many books this month that I just know that I'm going to love for the rest of my life, which is so amazing. I feel like I'm just so passionate about reading again, and I'd lost that. I've had quite a tumultuous year, and I feel like that kind of destroyed my love of reading a little bit. But with the spring, everything is growing again, and my love of reading is growing. I found something in me in the past month that just is very happy with what I'm reading and just loves books again. So that's amazing. I'm so happy about it, and I loved all of the books that I read. So thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you guys soon. Happy reading!